I was so sure this movie was a fever dream. I know that's the thing you're supposed to say whenever you stumble into a forgotten animated feature, but this time, I really mean it. I'm talking about the Danish, German, Irish, and whoever else-ish film A Fish Tale, also known as Help, I'm a Fish. Girl, help! First premiering in the year 2000 on Denmark, it only got an official US release in 2006, meaning that I somehow watched the Brazilian Portuguese version of this movie 3 years before most viewers of its main dub. Take that, North America! The story focuses on 3 kids who drink a science-y potion that transforms them into fish, and now they need to drink the antidote before time runs out or they will never be humans again. It's a simple premise. The average person could easily imagine how the plot would play out, and for the most part, I would say your guesses would end up being correct. But hidden within the same cheerful, kid-friendly setup lies a terrifying world of danger, violence, painful grief, and reckless power. A facade of human vices that comes strikingly close to a mirror. And also a bunch of music tracks that are a true staple of the early 2000s pop scene, lost among other tracks that are attempting to make this into a character-driven musical, not to mention a completely different version of this movie that is apparently lost to time. It's a complicated film, alright? And if I have to experience it, then I'm dragging you along with me. Is it worth the trip? Well, I guess we're about to find out. I wanna talk about Help, I'm a Fish. The movie begins with an atmospheric underwater voyage as the camera travels through the bottom of the ocean, running into all sorts of creatures while the initial credits roll. This motion is accompanied by a calming melody, sung in almost hypnotic fashion, inviting us to surrender to this universe. It's surprisingly aesthetic in a way which I find genuinely relaxing, and you become so lost in that lull that you almost fail to realize the change in the background. Even though the ocean blue surrounds us for the entirety of the sequence, its tone keeps on shifting, becoming lighter and lighter, and before you know it, you are bursting into the golden rays of the surface, only to be immediately knocked over by the catchiest, sparkliest 2000s pop song in the entire soundtrack. It's jarring, to say the least, but I won't let that stop us. Here's where we meet Fly, a lively teenage boy who is oddly excited about fishing and can't wait to test out his new lures. But he is forced to stay home with his cousin Chuck and his sister Stella as his parents go out for the night, with his aunt staying in as their babysitter. Fly drags the other 2 kids with him as soon as he has an opening, riding down to the beach to go fishing, which, I'm sorry, but I just find that really funny. The movie poses fishing like it's some sort of extreme sport here. Fly is clearly supposed to be the coolest of the 3, and his trademark radical teen activity is sitting on a rock waiting for fish to bite. Look at that boy go. When the tide rises over their path home, they stumble across the lair of Dr. McCrill, who claims he has found a way to turn humans into fish, which will save humanity from the disaster of the rising sea levels. The potion is made from ingredients found entirely underwater, and so is its antidote. But unless you drink the latter within 48 hours of the first, you will remain a fish for good. The real trouble begins once Stella drinks the potion and is unknowingly tossed into the ocean, so now the boys have to rescue her. To make matters worse, a storm hits their mission and supposedly drowns the professor, dropping the antidote into the sea, where it is found by what I can only describe as the fish version of the Joker. The gang eventually reunites, but they must face the fact that both the professor and the antidote are gone, and now they must find a way to become human again before the clock runs out. Meanwhile, Mr. Jokerfish, also known as Joe, becomes just a little more human by drinking the anti-fish juice and decides that being cursed with awareness is good, actually. He declares himself the new leader of the ocean and shares the antidote with other sea creatures, forcing them to obey his commands. Joe is honestly a really creepy villain. The more he extends the reaches of his power, the more he attempts to turn the ocean into an industrialized dystopia, sending half the creatures he meets into labor camps and forcing the rest to adore him. The fish seem thankful for their newfound intelligence, but their free will is almost immediately erased in the name of a cause they never really signed up for. The kids don't want anything to do with this mess. Their goal isn't to stop Joe and liberate the creatures, they just want to get their antidote back so that they can go home. It's a fair concern, and it makes the stakes seem much higher than if they were trying to save the ocean. They barely pose a threat to Joe's plans, since he can just keep on ruling the fish even after the kids are gone. But the kids themselves are under a strict time limit, so watching them trying to reason with Joe brings a great sense of powerlessness and urgency. In fact, this feeling kind of permeates the entire movie. Even when the kids were on land, they seemed to live on a state of perpetual sunset. The sky is already bright orange when Fly's parents go out, and it stays so for hours on end. The day goes on as the boys try to find something to do, sneak out to the beach, stay out for so long that the tides change. They get to know the professor and his crazy experiments, and they realize that Stella has been a victim of a transformation. And all the while, the sun has not finished hiding behind the horizon. A sunset feels a lot like a transitional period. It marks the shift between afternoon and night, and it doesn't last for very long. As the movie drags out this phenomenon, the viewer is left with a sense of deep anticipation. It's like the kids are stuck, living through the moment right before a big change. The last instant before crossing an unfathomable threshold. And the longer the sunset lasts, the more anxious you become. When change finally arrives, it's sudden and overpowering. Between the boys losing Stella and becoming a fish, a total of 30 seconds elapses in the runtime. Fly barely hesitates before drinking the potion, despite being warned of its dangers. It matches the impulsive nature he's displayed so far, sure, but it also confirms the notion that there's nothing else the kids can do. Change hits them like a hurricane, and unless they surrender to it, they will go down. After their confrontation with Joe, the kids recall the steps the professor took to create the potion, and they realize they can just make some antidote themselves. Their plan appears to be working out, but they are once again cornered by their enemies. And this time, it doesn't seem like they will be able to get away. Fly is injured in a scene that is way more violent than I was expecting, and Chuck needs to take the lead in order to bring the gang to safety. This outcome wasn't completely unexpected, given how their dynamic had already been established as your typical spontaneous cool teen versus the cautious nerd. And with this being a kids' film, you know they were bound to learn some lessons. But I actually appreciate the way the process was handled. Throughout their adventure, Fly had been characterized as a boy whose mouth worked faster than his brain. He was bold and clever, and he could talk his way out of a lot of trouble. But there was also a great amount of luck involved, because Fly never bothered coming up with a plan in case his talking didn't work. Chuck suffered from the opposite problem, in that he focused too much on the risks and never bothered to speak up or take action. Chuck calls out Fly's tendencies to take everything too casually without thinking ahead. And Fly also criticizes how Chuck never tries to change their situation, resigning to just moping and complaining. Once Fly gets hurt, his positivity fades, and he starts lamenting over how they won't be able to make it in time. His overly proactive tendencies were mostly a shield against the dangers that surrounded them, and now that they had been knocked down, there was nothing left for him to hold on to. Chuck seems to realize this as he takes over the role of leader, and he uses this as inspiration to calculate a new plan. Fly later learns to put his speech to good use too, carefully planning his quick remarks in order to defeat the villain. What I like about this process is how the boys didn't have to change their true nature. Chuck is still very much worried about consequence, and Fly is still a smart talker. But they each use something they learned with the other in order to improve their own qualities. Chuck's cautiousness, paired with some proactivity, allowed them to bypass the obstacles on their way to the professor's lab. And Fly's impulsive cleverness saved the gang's life once it was paired with planning and caution. It's a simple lesson, but still a welcome one. The kids are written with somewhat cliched personalities, but they never push it too far into insufferable territory, and when they change, it feels truly earned. Even the parents seem to go through a mini arc of their own. Fly's mom and dad come home and realize that the kids are missing since Chuck's mother had fallen asleep and allowed them to escape. They try calling the police, but to no avail, and they end up following the trail up to the scientist's house. Throughout this process, Chuck's mother keeps blaming Fly for the ordeal, saying that he's always been a bad influence, but the other parents don't give her much attention. As the search becomes more desperate, however, she eventually breaks down and admits that it's her fault for nodding off when she should be the one watching over the kids. She is not blamed for it by the others, much like they don't fight over her mean comments from before. They're just trying to keep it together during a terrible situation. And man, is this situation terrible. Even as we approach the end, things take a while before they start looking up. Sure, the kids defeat the villain and they find a new vial of the antidote, but then there's this whole sequence where it looks like Fly didn't quite make it, and Chuck loses it. Even when it's revealed that the kid is fine, Chuck is just staring into the void, contemplating his life's choices. But then they're swimming at the beach and everything's fine. The end. Cue the catchy 2000s pop song. This movie is something else. It's a silly premise and it's full of cutesy moments, but its darker scenes hit you like a freight train. It tries to be a musical, but only the scientist and Joe get actual in-character tracks, with the rest of the songs coming in as pop pieces that play in the background. It wants to be serious and let the quieter scenes take their time, but the pacing is sometimes so snappy that it feels unintentionally rushed. It's an experience, and I'm glad to have experienced it. I'm surprised this movie swam under the radar when people talk about underrated kids media, or even darker kids media for that matter. I suppose it comes from how this film doesn't belong to any major studio, or even thanks to its delayed international release. Or maybe everyone saw this official CGI cover and decided to stay away from this one. Which, can you blame them? There are so many things about this movie that are fascinating to me. The use of color is pretty clever. You have the orange of unease and anticipation versus the blue of calm and purpose. The land is locked in a golden sunset as the kids try to find a way to spend their time and tolerate each other, and they immerse themselves into a cyan world of fun and freedom. But the ocean itself becomes a threatening orange as they try to escape it, and the final shots consist of a wonderful, carefree blue sky once everyone is reunited. The animation itself is super nice, and the settings that they designed look amazing. I love the professor's laboratory. It's just a twisty house hidden inside a cave. Fantastic. And then you have all the apparatus that one might expect, but there's a brass look to it, almost steampunk-like. There's colorful fish tanks and this beautiful window, and the shots are so well crafted and detailed. The scene with Joe's fish cult is also one of my favorites. The guys set up camp in this abandoned sunken ship, and it's already such an artificial and harsh environment when compared to the rest of the ocean. There's this moment where the gang approaches what appears to be a giant luminous display, but it's actually a school of colored fish changing position in order to simulate the effect of a screen. And it's not only a creative visual, but it's also a terrifying sign of the power that Joe was able to amass in such a short period of time. And I know I already talked about Joe in this video, but the mere existence of this Jokerfish raises some rather disturbing questions. He gained intelligence thanks to the antidote, and he seems to be the new leader of the ocean because no other fish became smart enough to question him. He's gained a following from sharing the potion around, but you assume he feeds the creatures just enough for them to worship him, but not enough for anyone to question his authority. There was nothing about Joe that indicated he was evil before the potion. I mean, you barely even see the guy. Did he turn into a vicious dictator because he drank too much human juice, or because he simply carried a predisposition to abuse power? The only other creatures I can compare him to are the crabs that also become intelligent, and they turn into military-like servants. But one of them falls into greed and tries to drink more of the antidote so that he can become the new ruler of the sea. It's unclear whether the potion was creating those vicious personalities out of nowhere, or if it was merely enhancing vices that already existed. But the fact remains that the fish became more evil by becoming more human. The movie had already made a subtle jab at humankind before. After all, the professor developed the potion as a way of surviving the effects of global warming, which is essentially a man-made problem. And much like global warming is the result of too much power residing in the hands of a wrong but dangerous minority, once Joe gets a taste of that same unsupervised power, he decides to abuse it. He is an extreme case, but one which we can't ignore. A critique, mockery, and exaggeration of human behavior. Is this film trying to push a lesson that humanity is inherently bad? I don't think so. But I do find it interesting how fish society was undoubtedly better off without the burden of human intelligence. I mean, one sip of that people juice and they were trapped in a cult. And this is all especially intriguing to me because there was a version of this movie where none of that happened. A good 4 years before the film was officially released, a pilot trailer was put together showing a different animation style, different character names, and most importantly, a different plot. While the scientist in the final movie developed the potion with the specific intent of turning people into fish, the professor in the pilot trailer implies that the fish transformation is an accidental side effect. The villain also looks different, going for a goofier vibe instead of Joe's threatening presence. And at some point, the kids seem to be fighting in the name of saving the ocean, which they had no interest in doing in the final film. There's no critique on global warming, no fish cult, no steampunk science lab, no perpetual golden sunset. How much of this movie was completed? When did they decide to change it? How much of it was scrapped? I can't vouch for the quality of the movie had it followed the lead of the pilot trailer, but I can praise the film we ended up getting because it looks a lot better. Usually, finding out that a movie has had a troubled or halted production history isn't a good sign, and it ends up showing one way or another in the final product. But here, having a glimpse of what we could have had just makes me appreciate what we ended up getting a lot more. Help, I'm a Fish is a world of contrasts. The anticipation of change versus its shattering consequences, the cruelty of its villains versus the innocence of our heroes, the power of their determination against an unforgiving force of nature, Even the traditional musical songs versus the pop tracks, it all creates a mixture that is hard to find elsewhere, and that works to its favor more than you would imagine. I'm glad I was able to revisit this movie, and even gladder that it was a real film instead of just a weird memory. This one is definitely a hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. Thank you for watching. Well, hello there. It was very nice of you to watch this video. Special thanks to my beautiful Patreons for making videos like these possible. You guys are my little yellow fish in the deep blue sea. If you would like to join the gang, click the link in the description. If you have enjoyed the video, you can also help me out by clicking the like button, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the notification bell too. You can also follow me on Twitter and share this video with your friends. Feel free to leave a comment down below, especially if it is about how much you love Help, I'm a Fish, or Fishtail, depending on your naming preferences. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye! The weirdest part of this movie isn't the fish thing, it's the seahorse monstrosity that they create at the end. I can excuse the Joker fish, but I draw the line at this freak of nature.